apparently or supposedly or purportedly surveyed the first 100 days of Donald Trump and the public reaction. Almost immediately, headlines blared. Worst first 100 days in history. Trump drops from 52 to 41, 42. Everybody was confounded because the economic news was pretty good. Job growth was just spectacular, over 170,000 jobs. Inflation was down. Energy prices were down. Corporate profits were up. There was a movement on the trade question. Ukraine still, there was no bad news except the controversy and chaos of a counter-revolution. So what were the pollsters trying to tell us? Or were they trying to manipulate us? And I think it's the latter. Larry Kudlow, for example, the former Fox business, I think he still is at Fox, he pointed out that when he examined the New York Times and the Washington Post polls, they were deliberately not counting people who surveyed that they were Trump voters in 2024. That was half the country. They were only polling about a third. Think of that. A third of the people that said they voted for Trump, they polled, not half. So of course their results were going to be disputed or suspect. But here's another thing. There were analyses after each of the 2016, the 2020, and the 2024 elections about the accuracy of polls post facto the election. And we learned that they were way off in 2016. They said they had learned their lessons. They were way off in 2020. They said they learned their lesson. And they were way off in 2024. And why are they way off? Because liberal pollsters, and that's the majority of people who do these surveys, believe that if they create artificial leads for their Democratic candidates, it creates greater fundraising and momentum. Kind of the herd mentality. Oh, Trump is down by 6. I don't want to vote for him then. He won't win. That's the type of thing that they want to create. I'll give you one example. The most egregious of all these polls was the NPR PBS Marist poll. They have Donald Trump just very unpopular after 100 days. Very unpopular. This is the now defunded Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that umbrella organization from which this poll was funded and conducted. Do you remember that poll? It was the one poll that came out the night before the 2024 election. They said that Kamala Harris would win by 4 points. And they said it was beyond the margin of error. And one of the pollsters said it's her race to lose. She lost by 1.5 points. They were 5.5 points. Did they apologize? No. Here they are again. And David Plouffe, one of the directors of the Harris campaign, just recently came out and said, well, we had all these inside polls we never disclosed, but not one of them had Harris ever ahead of Trump. The inside polls don't lie because you pay somebody to tell you the truth. Nothing will get you fired and lose income quicker than to lie about a poll so that your candidate will be happy and rely on your false information. People don't pay for that kind of stuff. So in other words, they knew the whole time, the Harris campaign, that 15 of those 20 polls, 19 polls, that all had Harris winning the election, they were all false. Of course they never said anything. And so here's my point. If you look at the polls that were the most accurate, Mark Penn was very accurate. He's a Democratic pollster. But especially the Rasmussen poll and the Insider Advantage and the Trafalgar poll, they joined together and they had a 100-day survey. Rasmussen, each day of the 100-day period that he's issued a poll. And guess what? They have Trump ahead by anywhere from 2 to 3 points after 100 days. And they were the most accurate. And yet, what do these news outlets say? That Trump it's a disaster, that he's polling. No, he's polling very well. Things are going very well because the pollsters that indicate that people support him are the only pollsters that have any reputation after this decade-long polling disaster in which their prejudices, their biases, and their hatred of Donald Trump affected their results, and they were effectively in league with the Democratic candidate to create momentum rather than to adhere to a spirit of professionalism and honor.
If you look at the people around Trump, then you've got the hawkish people are around Waltz, the national security advisor. Marco Rubio is in between. J.D. Vance is the MAGA restraint wing. And Pete Hegseth is sort of where Rubio is. He goes, yes. So he inherited good friends. There was a period in his life when he was a hawk. You know, he wanted. But the problem we have with all of this is, and I think this is the problem, they don't understand exactly, and you saw that in that transcript of the leaked conversation about the Houthis, they can't define, and I don't know if anybody can, what Trump's foreign policy is with the use of force, especially in the Middle East. Is it Jacksonian? We saw in the first term that Trump said he wanted to get out of ground operations. He basically did. So his attitude, as everybody understood it, was no better friend, no worse enemy, don't tread on me. If you provoke us, we will retaliate disproportionately. And that's what I think what that policy is. The problem with that is that the MAGA base says, well, that is basically a non-interventionist policy. And the hawkish base say, no, it's not. It's intervene and pick and choose where in a cost-benefit analysis where it's a clear a benefit to deterrence. And I don't know how it's not going to be adjudicated until Donald Trump explicitly calls everybody in and says, this is the policy. They have another problem, and that is we're not hearing much about the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He's only weighing in on immigration, which are minor issues. So we have this special envoy, Weisskopf, and he had no diplomatic experience. He's not a bad negotiator, but the problem with is he says things that he shouldn't say, and then he has to retract them. Briefly, is that Donald Trump is in a race right now because he has 70 nations that he says that want to cut a deal. He's got 3 or 4 big ones. But if you look at the pressure on him, he's got the left. You have Jeremy Raskin saying, we're going to hold responsible any foreign nation that works with Donald Trump. You've got the left just hysterical. You've got the European governments privately saying, we think that Trump will lose the midterm. We think we can outweigh him. And we have the Americans telling the Europeans through back channels, you shouldn't make any deals with Trump. Wait him out. And then you've got China saying the same thing. And then you've got traditional quasi-conservative venues like the Wall Street Journal that's every single day saying Trump's going to cause a depression. Trump has ruined this. Trump is terrible. It's the most anti-Trump venue. I've never seen anything like it with a Republican president. So he knows right now that he has to cut a deal within the next 30, 40 days to calm the stock market. Today's headline was, worst April almost since Great Depression. And yet he knows that if he tries to rush it and cut a deal without proper leverage, it's not going to be a good deal. Then they're going to ridicule him. So he's got to withstand all of this pressure, communicate what he's trying to do, and then within 30 or 40 days, he needs a Japan or South Korea or somebody like that, Germany, a big country to cut a deal that doesn't get us completely symmetrical, but makes, substantial progress in reducing their surpluses and getting less prohibitive tariffs. And then once that happens, the other 70 nations will not want to be left out, and they will come saying, well, me too. But until he does that, he's in the fight for his life right now. Once a president starts to intervene in that independent quasi office, then bad things happen. But the head of the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates in the final quarter of the campaign to help Biden. And that's what Trump is angry about. He's angry because there were two inflation reports, one in March and one in the first half of April from the government. And they showed that inflation's about 2.6, and one was 2.4. And they also showed that oil prices had gone substantially from nearly $100 a barrel down to near 60. And they showed that it didn't seem to have a negative effect on job growth. There was 100,000 more jobs in the month of March that were created than anticipated. And in addition to that, there's $4 or $5 trillion of new foreign investment that's coming. So what Trump is saying is, if the indicators were not that positive and he lowered the interest rate, and yet there's no sign of inflation these couple of months, why doesn't he lower the interest rate for me? And the answer is because he's a partisan. So what Trump has decided to split the difference. If he fires him, he's going to be in big trouble, and he's going to further rankle the markets, and the Wall Street Journal and Wall Street in general are going to go after him. So he doesn't think he can politically fire him, but he wants to put pressure on him and to lower interest rates by attacking him. And the problem with that is, if you do get an interest rate quarter point reduction, then everybody's going to say that the Fed caved to Trump. So they're going to maybe hold out longer than they would have anyway. So I think there's going to be people like Besant and others will tell Trump politely, don't go after the Fed. You've done what you achieved your purpose. He understands that he's under pressure now. Now be quiet so that he can lower interest rates without making a connection with your rhetoric and pressure. And that's where we are. But I don't think it's a good idea for a president to fire a person when he disagrees with him publicly. There's times they've done it before, but it doesn't look good.
No other Republican has ever thought that they would address the national debt, the budget deficit, the trade deficit, the woke movement, the DEI movement, the ESG movement, the universities, the border, the deportations, all at once. I don't think Reagan didn't do it even in his revolution, to rebound the American economy and win the Cold War. The two Bushes didn't try it. Romney and McCain didn't run on it. So even Trump in his first administration, for a lot of it, it was very orthodox Republicanism. This is very different. This is an ambitious agenda to undo a lot of the things of the last 25 years. So nobody thought you could still in the 21st century deport people who had come here illegally. That was sort of taboo in the Western world. Well, I think he's at the cusp, and it could go either way. He's got some spectacular successes on the border. We were told that you could not close the border. You had to have comprehensive immigration legislation. That didn't turn out to be true. The border is closed now. There is almost no entries. The biggest problem is how to go about deporting 10 to 12 million people who came in illegally on top of the 20 million that were here illegally prior to the Biden years. And we have a kind of a strange legalistic argument used by the left, and that is, while it's lawful to let in mass people illegally, it's unlawful to follow the law and send them back collectively. They have to be individually adjudicated, they said. So that's a mixed bag. Great on the border. It's lawfare waged on the deportations. So the foreign policy is pretty good. The biggest issue, of course, is the trade war. And I think as long as the president had stick to these principles of reciprocity, symmetry, and reducing the $1.2 trillion trade deficit and 50 years of consecutive deficits, he had public support. But there's really only about 7 entities. He talks about 70 people, 90. It's only 7 entities that account for that deficit, and it's mostly the $300 billion from China, the $240 from the EU, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, probably $150, $200 billion, and then Canada and Mexico together about $250 billion. And that's about it. But when he goes into another realm, then I think that has hurt him and accounts for some of the pull
slippage of 3 or 4 points, and those are two areas. When he says he's going to have a blanket tariff, and that country in particular is running a deficit with us, and I'm talking now about the UK or Australia to take two examples, or Israel, that loses public support. They think, why would you tariff the Brits or the Australians, who are our allies, when we're already running a surplus on trade with those two particular countries? Then the second thing that has hurt him, I think, every once in a while he gets on this cul-de-sac about revenue. Tariffs account for 2% of American federal income of $5.4 trillion. We only get about 70 to 150, depending on the year, billion. But he says if we get a 15% tariff, we could make $1 trillion or $2 trillion over a decade, but you do the math and it's still only 100 or 200 billion out of 5 trillion. And that doesn't go well with the American people, because they bought into it on the idea of fairness, symmetry, reciprocity as a goal to either lower tariffs or eliminate them. But when you divert from that and say you want to see this as a source of revenue, then it, in the mind of the American, it's sort of price gouging or a quick, it's get-rich scheme, and they don't support it. The polls show that. Well, the problem with that is, I think, and I support the president, but 40% of American households do not pay income tax now. They actually get, most of them get a credit. As far as the tax cut for tips, a lot of studies have showed 50% of the people who get tips don't report it anyway, because it's easy not to report. So we don't know how big that will be. But the purpose of DOGE, remember, we've targeted about 170 billion. I don't think we're going to get up to 500 billion, but the point of DOGE was that you could go beyond the renewal of the tax cuts and get more tax cuts on things like people who receive Social Security, or first responders, or military people. That would be stimulus to the economy, and it would be paid for by a 25% reduction in the budget deficit. But the problem, I think, with that is we would still, after running on trying to have a trajectory toward a balanced budget, we would then basically be zero out. Whatever we saved, we would give in tax cuts. That may give greater growth, GDP, and more revenue in a year or two, but in the short term, we'd still be stuck with this nearly $2 trillion budget deficit. So I think a lot of people think, well, we'll just renew the tax cuts. That's good enough. Just make sure we renew them, and then let DOGE cut, and let's see if we can get that 1.9, 2 point, whatever it is, budget deficit down to 300 or 400 billion or so. And so I think what I'm getting at is that slippage is not just the Wall Street hysteria, but it's mixed signals on revenue and tariffs, and it's mixed signals on whether you're a physical hawk and you want to balance the budget, or whether you want to be a supply sider and take a temporary larger deficit in the hopes of getting more expansive growth and future greater revenue. There's been a war, but I think the emphasis, if you ask yourself who is waging war against the left has. They were the ones that went after the court. They were the ones who tried to take Trump off the ballot. And all of those four indictments, those four local, state, federal prosecutors, every single one is facing real problems. So my point is that they have systematically abused the legal system, the left. So Andy is now mad at Donald Trump, but he doesn't quite get the political nature. And this is what a Harvard-Harris poll just showed. 75% of Americans want illegal aliens who have committed crimes or are involved in criminal activity to be deported. And their way of thinking goes like this. Joe Biden broke the law. Alejandro Mayorkas was impeached for breaking the law. A federal law says you cannot cross the border of the United States when you please and illegally enter. You can visit the United States if you have a passport and you're from a country that does not, require visas. Or we don't require that country, or you can come through at San Diego or other legal points and visit. You cannot just walk across. You can't do that with any country. Somewhere between
8 and 12 million people did that. Now, Andy says that J.D. Vance was exaggerating with 20 million. I think J.D. was talking about the 20 million. He got confused. There was 20 million here already. And Andy says 10. No, 10, and now there's 20. No, there was 20 here. Yale study showed that years ago. So now we have probably 30 million. But the point is, most people, as the polls show, said, well, wait a minute. None of you people who are suing on the left were bothered that they had destroyed the law. In other words, you allowed illegal aliens to come across and you didn't enforce the law. You were subversive. You were insurrectionary. Same thing with sanctuary cities. They break the law. And so, in the American mind, the collective American mind, it goes something like this. Somebody comes across illegally without permission. Then he resides illegally. He has abused our legal system. He has stuck his thumb out, nose up. We don't like you. We don't even want to get near you. When we get a court hearing and they pick it, we don't go. Then all of a sudden when he's deported, as he should never have been let in, then all of a sudden we have to give the legal system to him, as if the Constitution is a suicide pact. That's what it's colonialism. I don't know how the left gets itself into these situations where they come across so illiberal. That this is a losing issue for them. And there's already been a commercial cut by the RNC or New York Post where come to El Salvador and see, and they have all these pictures of democratic people. Come to beautiful ganglands, wonderful prisons. It's just, you'll love it in El Salvador. I don't know what, I understand the law, that the final verdict was he should not be until it was firmly established that he was a known, proven, certified gang member, etc., and he had violated this, and then, but they'd done that so much due process, but he was looking at the ultimate, not the penultimate or the earlier rulings. The MAGA movement, in theory, says we are Jacksonian. Some of the MAGA people interpret that as neo-isolations. The Middle East isn't worth it. It's not worth the bones of one, to paraphrase Bismarck, one American Marine to go over there. They're all hopeless. Let's just keep out, build our Fortress America. And the other is, well, we don't go nation building after the disasters, but we're Jacksonians. No better friend, no worse enemy, don't tread on me. So we're like a tiger. We're crouching. And you screw around with us, the Houthis. So he's got the MAGA people telling Pete Hegseth, are you with, we want to know, are you with J.D. Vance? Or are you with Waltz and the interventionist? Or are you neutral, like Marco Rubio? And when you had that leaked conversation, he went back and forth. It kind of ended up more with the J.D. Vance people, but he's also a Jacksonian. So the people who want him to be Jacksonian and retaliate, or, have a big presence around the world and don't take crap from anybody and restore deterrence, they're leaking about the MAGA people.
If you enjoyed today's video on Inner Vision, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below.